So we're going to do our final session, which is on the enterprise. We've been talking about consumer-related applications. Primarily, we're going to shift to the enterprise to talk about what type of innovation is happening there. Couple of angles, new products and services in the enterprise market, and also how it changes work. Because enterprises obviously employ lots and lots of people, and how it changes the nature of work. A few things I just wanted to share as context setting. It goes without saying that we experience technology when we buy products and services, when we receive recommendations of all types, when we go to a doctor's office, etc. We receive it across a variety of areas, but the role of artificial intelligence is going to dramatically enhance a lot of those experiences. One of the forecasts that's come out by the Forrester Group is that 2.5 million jobs in the U.S. are likely to be replaced by generative AI. When you look at the number of people that are going to need to be retrained for other jobs, IBM has said it's going to be about 120 million jobs. One of the things that will be a positive element of all this, and it's one of the things that Satya Nadella said at last year's World Economic Forum, is that we're going to see a massive improvement in knowledge management, in productivity, in workforces of all types. The market now is huge, specifically for generative AI in the enterprise. If you look at ChatGPT, if you look at the rate of adoption, the statistics are amazing. So basically, to get to 1 million users of the ChatGPT app, it took 5 days. If you look at other companies getting to 1 million users, how much longer they took compared to ChatGPT. Instagram, 2.5 months it took to get to 1 million. Facebook, it took 10 months. Twitter, it took 24 months. Netflix, it took 41 months. Rapid adoption and ongoing use. If you look on the enterprise side, GitHub. So for the developer market, now 100 million developers using GitHub. GitHub Copilot, so their generative AI tool, is now being used by more than 1 million developers. So significant activity there. When you look at capital going into this sector, huge numbers here. Microsoft invested $10 billion in OpenAI. Anthropic, which is another AI player focused on safety and research, they're likely to receive about $7 billion in funding, about $2 billion from Google and up to about $4 billion from Amazon. Number of applications has continued to grow. One of the comments that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has said is the most powerful models are large, and there'll actually just be a very small number of companies that have the chips, the processing capability to take advantage of them. This is something, by the way, Paul said in the previous session, saying it's going to be a small number of companies. It's going to be Google, it's going to be Meta, it's going to be Microsoft, etc. So very interesting to see where the large players come out. Final couple of contextual items here. Up to 60 to 70% of activities of workers potentially could be automated through generative AI. And as I mentioned, about 120 million people will probably face the important activity of needing to be retrained. So all of this brings me to our final guest speaker here, who's Gail Shepard. Feel free to come on up here now, Gail. I've known Gail for quite a few years. She's got a very impressive senior leadership background with a variety of companies. She was a corporate VP and head of global expansion and digital transformation at Microsoft Cloud and AI. She was the chief technology officer for Microsoft Asia. She led digital strategies and geographic expansion on the Microsoft Azure platform, including Azure Data and global public and sovereign cloud expansion. Before that, when I first met her, she was the general manager, vice president of Saffron AI, which was an AI ML business unit ultimately that was acquired by Intel. She's had leadership roles at PeopleSoft and JD Edwards. sits on a variety of boards, including Nutanix, which is a cloud software and hyper-converged infrastructure maker. She's on the board of Astroscale Holdings, which is a satellite servicing company. And she's been on the board of Invista Holdings as well, which is a med tech company. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of South Florida. As a reminder, on Q&A, we'll use Slido. So the code on this, you can probably guess, is Easton 3. So the number 3, Easton 3. Big welcome to you, Gail. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for that great introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I could have gone on another like 20 minutes here on the background, but we want to get to the questions, et cetera.
Surely.
So I always like to start out when you have somebody that's had such an interesting career. You've worked in a variety of industries. I think especially the fact you've worked in the cloud space,
right,
where you have to work with lots of companies that are digitizing and all of that. Take us through your career journey first, and then I want to go through kind of innovation from there.
We do not have enough time to go through my career journey, but really, actually, I'm going to break it into 3 major segments, right? So early in my career, we had the advent of mid-range compute for increasing the accessibility and affordability of compute power for medium and small businesses, or the lower scale of the large business. So that was a major transformation underway, and that would generate the opportunity for a lot of software applications to be developed. And it was really the beginning in my mind of the enterprise software era. So there was that. The PC, would come along during that time frame. I would be in software. That's been my discipline throughout my career in some form or fashion. But and the roles I played in the industry have been engineering, customer project management, product management, sales and marketing, and general management, to name a few. So I've done, and I had the opportunity when I was arriving in the space, that every year you could grow and scale out as an individual professionally. So I think we're actually in another one of those timeframes where a lot of change is going to occur, a lot of new opportunity to build new applications such that we've not seen before, and therefore you will be able to grow very fast in this next generation of career. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, in some of your questions. But back to the phases. So I spent the first, decade of my career there. The second decade would be spent really focusing in on AI and machine learning, and joining 2 guys from the IBM labs in Raleigh, North Carolina, to develop and commercialize a technology for reasoning. And this was a hypersparse matrix sort of orientation. It was a technology that was focused on finding sparse data in large data sets in order to understand trends, emergent trends, to understand connections that were not obviously associated with each other, and other assorted predictive capabilities of technology. We applied that in Iraq in the IED defeat program. We applied that in healthcare, in trying to distinguish between 2 heart diseases, one fatal, one not. But it was very hard to detect for cardiologists. We applied it in anti-money laundering and fraud, as well as in supply chain optimization. So a lot of applications were built during my tenure at Safran. The company would be acquired by Intel in my 10th year of building that business. So that was no small journey in itself. And then I would spend 3 years at Intel. I left Intel, which would really begin the next phase of my career, which is Microsoft. And Microsoft was seeking someone to develop a new product management team to grow and build out their data portfolio. SQL Server had been the heart of that $12, $13 billion business. That was part of the portfolio, but a lot of new open database technology, data warehouse, data lake technology was being built to serve the analytics of Microsoft as well as their customers. I would spend some time there, but I would be recruited over to global expansion, which is one of the great joys of my life, was helping define the next generation of hyperscale cloud regions for Microsoft around the world. So we were well established in the United States and Europe and some other markets, but we really had to get into the Middle East, Africa, further concentrate ourselves in Asia more broadly, including Japan, and Australia, New Zealand. So that was one aspect of global expansion. Terry touched on sovereign clouds. Sovereign clouds are national clouds. They have special security and ingest and egress, requirements for data, who can touch the data, et cetera. And so France and Germany and Singapore, for example, were three countries that were working on sovereign clouds. And that would be a private version of a public cloud for government and their key infrastructure partners' use. The great news about that role for me is that it allowed me to take a lot of my experience as an expat in Japan and Asia Pacific early in my career, my interest in geopolitics and global expansion broadly, and use it for making decisions about where we go next, right? Where, do we build a data center in Riyadh? And a data center is really three data centers, a cloud region. Do we build that in Cairo? Do we in Doha? Yes, we did. And yes, we are in Riyadh. And so there's a lot of exploration, a lot of political analysis, human rights analysis, data security, et cetera, that goes into that. So for the conclusion of my career at Microsoft, I really was taking an end-to-end systems point of view. That would lead me to CTO of Asia Pacific for a short time before I joined Bright Machines as their CEO. Bright Machines is a factory automation company using robotics to replace and or augment the work of people on the factory assembly line, and clearly has a new generation of end-to-end systems, collecting data along the way that's never been collected before and never been usable before on the factory line itself for security and quality, and also for just operational efficiency. And then being able to share that data from the edge into the cloud to with supply chain management, product management, design management, et cetera, for what's working and what's not in the field, if you will. So it's a new generation of technology I'm very excited about. And Gen AI, large language models will have their role there. But I think of them as the industrial models, not the Sam Altman. The more data, the larger the model, the more effective it is. So that would define my career. Now, I have since left the role as operator and decided I went off the grid from roughly the middle of August to the middle of December for the first time in my life, with the exception of the board work that I do where I have to pay attention. But I tried not to use ChatGPT and not to, study all this. So I've been drinking from the fire hose since I came back off the grid at the end of late last year. But basically right now I'm focusing on my board work, Nutanix and Astroscale, both companies I'm very excited about. I formed a startup called Axie in 2019 when I left Intel right before I joined Microsoft. That is the next generation of Saffron, and it's working on episodic memory and unplanned events, and predicting unplanned events and preventing unplanned events. And we were working in the airline industry, which you should all appreciate because they need our help. So that's where I'm spending my time right now, Terry.
Excellent. So, given that fascinating background you've had through kind of different waves of technology adoption, different geographies, going off the grid for a few months, and then coming back to today, what's changed? You probably have a good vantage point to say, what's kind of changed in the environment? We talk about generative AI, et cetera. What's your view on all that?
Well, it's interesting because what was changing before I left was the demand for bare metal VM, the compute for AI. And so, NVIDIA couldn't supply enough chips, and the hardware makers couldn't make enough hardware, and Microsoft and Google and AWS, et cetera, were challenged to figure out how they overcome that to supply demand from the cloud. So a lot of that has changed, and the movement there has been so fast, with NVIDIA now rolling out the H200 at the end of Q2 to help supply the hardware needed in these private data centers by the corporations as well as the big cloud providers. So also, when we look at what was happening at Microsoft, before I left the grid and while I was on the grid, or off the grid, I should say, the use of Copilot, right? So Copilot first was kicked off in GitHub, where it really accelerated the ability of developers and actually started learning from developers on how they code, to finish products for them, to finish coding for them. And that idea, though, is useful in Word, it's useful in Teams, it's useful in Excel, it's useful in PowerPoint, it's useful everywhere in Microsoft, and those are just a few simple examples. And so Copilot becoming a pervasive, if you will, cross-fabric for the enterprise is important. A lot of people will criticize that because it's Microsoft and there may be other products in their niche that are more powerful. But when you think about Copilot in the enterprise and how hard it is for CIOs and CTOs to manage those environments for their employees, having a tool like that, the standardized, it's understood how it works, it can be managed and controlled for security purposes and governance purposes. It's a great idea. So I think it's going to be a successful outlet for Microsoft.
So if you go to your Azure background, where you get a chance to work with all these different companies and industries, and they're thinking about digitizing, what are the most interesting applications, companies, industries you say, pay attention to what they're doing because they're a leader?
Well, I think the first thing we're seeing, of course, is ChatGPT and Gen AI, I should call it, really invading, if you will, the consumer side of these businesses, right? So improving the way we talk with customers, improving what we know about customers, frankly, bringing all that unstructured data with all that anecdotal information into it and making it purposeful. When I joined Azure as head of product management for data, only 23% of the available data in any enterprise was being used at that time. The rest of it wasn't being used primarily because it was unstructured, right? Or it was video data, it was textual data, et cetera. So now all of that data becomes available for use. So if I were a corporation today, the first thing I would do is to figure out how to put it through my version of an LLM to create an enterprise a library of more useful information that can be used by any of the applications that I may have. When we think about another example, so we have the customer side of this, right? And all of the comments we make when we talk to a customer, the chats going back and forth, all of that is effectively unstructured data, and it is now being used. So that's change one. Change two is things that are operationally intense. So we look at maintenance. I think of aircraft. In my work with Boeing, it's at points in my career, and a mechanic would be able to size up, let's take a rotorcraft, for example, would be able to visually see if there were any damage to the frame of that aircraft, bumps, things weren't hanging correctly, whatever. The human is just really good at seeing these patterns. Additionally, he or she would write that down, and that would go in a report. And every inspection would have a checklist and a written comment. So those written comments have not typically been usable with the structured data to learn from the experience of these mechanics. And as mechanics retire out, or if we're working with the Air Force or the Navy, as they leave service, all of that knowledge goes with them, except that it was actually, most of it, a lot of it was recorded. So the expert in us, one of our prior speakers said, hey, I have decades of context, right, about how things work. Some of you have decades of context as well. And so that's hard to replicate through AI. But when you can take the decades of expertise that was recorded about assets in your company or about people or about customers, that's a very specialized context. Now that becomes extremely useful. And that's where I see one of the great jumps forward or leaps forward for what's happening right now.
One of the cases I use in my tech management classes on Slack that was bought out by Salesforce, it was like $28 billion. And the founder of Slack made a comment that email is like the cockroach on the internet.
Right.
Despised email and how much time people spend and blah, 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 and talked about Slack being kind of one of these things that's going to reform it. Fast forward to a couple of months ago, one of my former students is now at Microsoft and came to my home and gave me a demo on Copilot.
Love it.
And I was like blown away about email exchange, et cetera. It can understand the context of an email coming in, draft an email back. It understands your style of communicating, how formal, how informal, blah, 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 et cetera. Is that type of application, is this going to completely change work as we know it, enterprise as we know it, and players like Microsoft are going to be kind of front and center winners in all this?
Yes.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yes. Absolutely. I don't know, how many people use some form of Gen AI to help you today in your work, your life? Okay, almost everyone, okay. Has it changed your life? Yes. Yes? Okay. So we're just at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. We have no idea what's ahead. I just remember being a kid, and joining my first software company thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know this is the right place to be. And that's how I feel about Gen AI. I'm not as worried about the bad side of it, right? Which we hear a lot about. I am excited about the EU, and the way they're looking at it. I always trust the EU to possibly overprescribe initially, but I'm okay with that while we figure it out. And the executive order from President Biden, I like that. I like the fact that Microsoft and Google and AWS and anyone supplying services to the U.S. government has to show up and explain how they're doing that. That's a recent event that's occurred. And so I trust but verify, right? And I think you probably are, okay, I just asked, maybe I'm using ChatGPT to help me frame a discussion I want to have with a worker that I'm coaching, or with a business plan I'm writing, or whatever it might be. And that's, interactive, the chat interactive nature of that. So basically you have an intelligent agent working on your behalf, is really, really productive. Mm-hmm. It's productive for me. I've been using it in preparation for this session. Mm-hmm. And it's productive, I think, for anyone who engages in it. But if you're doing something new for the first time, how do you judge whether you're getting the right information or not, right? If you're in a new territory, then there becomes a requirement for us as in that exploration stage to verify the results that we're getting, so we don't have hallucinations as part of our story, right? So I think trust but verify is really an important concept.
Yeah, let me ask you, let's dive deeper on some of these applications. McKinsey did an interesting report a few months ago about the economic potential of generative AI, and they identified 4 job categories that they feel are going to be ripe for generative AI in 3 sectors. The 4 jobs were customer operations, marketing and sales, coding, software development, and R&D. Those 4 areas they said are going to be the highest kind of percent likelihood that generative AI is going to be used. And they talked about 3 sectors that are going to face this a lot. They talked about high tech because they have a lot of software developers. Right. They talked about banking, and they talked about life sciences. What is your take on that? Do you buy those 4 areas of jobs and think those are going to be the biggest areas of adoption, or would you put others in or replace anything?
Well, healthcare wasn't one of those, right?
No, it was life sciences, but it wasn't per se healthcare.
Healthcare, and maybe for me, it's what I think will have a change the world impact. So. The 4 jobs that we describe here were already being impacted by AI and ML. They already have it embedded in them, as we well know in our interactions, right? Software developers already had tools that were automating tasks for them, or quality and testing tasks, et cetera. So I feel like they were sort of, and I love McKinsey, but I feel like they were the obvious, we're going to keep doing that, right? And we're going to continue, we'll be early adopters and continue advancing these jobs with generative AI. I do think, so healthcare and space are the 2, and maybe factory and manufacturing are maybe the 2 or 3 industries that excite me the most. I'll talk about healthcare first. We have been, since I went into AI back in 2005, I've been dreaming about personalized medicine. And it's been impossible to do.
Yeah.
Why? Well, one is missing context, right, about me or you. And so when you can, and having, in a complex disease like cancer, certain cancers are very rare, you may have 1,000 incidents of them around the world, but you have no way of aggregating the information, the knowledge, the experience from those 1,000 incidents into one database so that you could understand and look at trends and patterns. And nor did you have the information about my lifestyle or the person who's ill's lifestyle and the wellness practices they have, et cetera, to help feed that. My husband died of cancer. He was given a year to live. He lived 3.5. Why did he live 3.5? No one knows. I can surmise why. He had a wellness practice and an attitude and all those things. So now we can actually take that into consideration in order to predict your trajectory on how you are going to deal with a complex disease. And you may end up dying, but you will have a better information about how to live your life between now and then, including wellness. So I think that has to be, for me, one of the most important things we're going to see in our lifetimes. The second thing is space. So there are 36,500 roughly objects orbiting Earth right now. And they are bigger than 10 centimeters. And any satellite launch that might run into one of these useless things orbiting Earth can create more space trash, more space junk, and actually might take down some of the things that we rely on when we have big accidents in space. We use it for our communications. We use it for our GPS systems. So when we're driving our cars and using our mobiles to get somewhere. I mean, there's 100 applications where we're using the tools that are actually resident in space. And more of that will occur. We're sending up more and more satellites to help with this data center expansion that we see around the world, and one of the problems that Gen AI is actually creating in demand. Space, however, doesn't have a lot of data. So I think one of the great advancements we will see over the next decade, can't come fast enough, is that we'll have more data collected in space. Space is the new big edge, if you will. And we will be able to keep that, we'll be able to store that locally in space until such time we can stream it to Earth. And we don't have to stream everything to Earth, just the things that really matter. So we can be selective about that. But think about your careers and where, if anyone here in aerospace, this is an aerospace corridor, right? Think about what's ahead, right? And the career opportunities in this particular industry, I think, are going to be significant for technologists as well as the astrophysicists and the ecosystem we operate in. And because I think AWS, did I hear that AWS is planning to build data centers in space?
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. So data's got to be collected, and a lot of it's going to be collected up there. So how do you process that? And then when we're running out of space here on Earth, how do you take the efficiency of the work that we're already doing in space for networking and communications and expand it?
Yeah.
So that's number two. I also think that when we were looking at supply chains and reshoring and nearshoring during COVID, that has set up a new trend for factory automation and using more and more robotics and the vision skills that we have now, which are continuing to be enhanced through Gen AI, and to reduce the number of people that are used on factory lines. And why do we want to reduce the number of people used on factory lines? Is because many of the tasks are extraordinarily repetitive, and they're actually performed so much better by a robot who doesn't tire out, whose wrist doesn't hurt from the screwing mechanism or whatever the cause might be. And so there are tasks that can be appropriately automated without a human in the loop. There are smart skills. Let's think about, let's be Dell for a moment. Dell, I forget how many products Dell has, but hundreds of products. Many of them are configured to order specifically for a customer. These are things you study in your MBA programs, right? And so that configured to order thing, though, is a problem, because if you're using robotics and whatnot, you have to, or humans even, maybe even worse, you have to build the product the SKU coming through the line for customer A, let's call them Microsoft. You have to build that product specifically for Microsoft and their spec. That means that we have to, get the paper out and look at how do we build this for Microsoft, right? Well, with smart skills and end-to-end systems, you drive that automatically based on what we're building. The SKU matches the BOM, and off we go. And the robots are automatically reskilled. They know how to build this particular thing. And the humans have directional guidance that is automatic for them, so they don't have to remember everything. And so those types of techniques have been used in other industries, automotive, for an example, but they've not been available for manufacturing of discrete products. They've certainly not been available for configure to order and very specialized manufacturing techniques, and they will be. And while they're doing that, we're going to generate a lot more data, we're going to learn a lot more, and we're going to supply chain, as I said earlier, and design and demand and customer warranty services, and all of those things are in the lifetime value of a product. We're going to be feeding them with more information as well.
Let me ask you on this, Gail, now enablers, because you're talking about a lot of great applications here. What allows for people to adopt versus not? And by the way, Marilee made an interesting comment on the previous session. She said a lot of enterprises don't really get a lot of generative AI. Let me give you a quick story. United Airlines. We had to speak here a couple of years ago. Linda Jojo was outstanding. She was Chief Digital Officer for United, and she's continued moving up, and she talked all about using data at United to put it into passenger-facing employees' hands. Flight attendants, gate agents, et cetera, and all the things that are going on there. But then I remember touring their maintenance base in San Francisco, where the head of global operations and network, I was saying, gosh, do you share data about aircraft conditions, weather conditions, to do predictive maintenance, to understand safe flying, blah, blah, blah. And I remember him saying, Mr. Kramer, we will never share our data with anybody else unless the FAA mandates us to do that. And I thought, wow, this is going to be an interesting kind of adoption issue. What is your view about kind of how do you get adoption to happen or not? Because more and more the story's kind of playing out that the data exists, the models exist, and what the variable item is now is people's attitudes towards the data. And by the way, Paul said even generative AI can be creative, but then I've heard many people in kind of traditional media and entertainment saying, we're a creative business, we'll use it to schedule our sound stages, we will not use it in content creation. How do you deal with what is such a disparate attitude and get adoption to occur?
The first thing that comes to my mind is competition, competitive response, right? So if you're not using it, and if company A is doing a better job of communicating, relating to, and serving customers, and the switching costs aren't extraordinarily high, why would they stay with the company that's not staying with a company that's not using that? They're not getting that kind of service from. So I think this is owned by the CEO and the board. It is a topic that every board meeting has to have, and it's a topic that the CEO has to be almost maniacal about in terms of hey team, how are we doing here, here, and here? And the CEO has a great idea of where competitive impact can be reached, right? So the CEO isn't some person walking around asking people what they think he or she should do. So remember, the CEO is going to drive and lead this, and that's what I think is a defining difference, because they understand there's just something happened that's going to allow me to improve the competitive position of my business, and I have an opportunity to do that first and to take share, grow share, et cetera, that I didn't have before because this technology exists. So that's number one. Number two, the culture of these firms is where I'm hearing also the problem to be. They don't have maybe they don't have a growth mindset and innovation, core muscle, or the agility. The agility, innovation, growth mindset comes from culture. And so that's another examination. And by the way, these are great criteria for you if you're looking for a role as you graduate, when you're looking at companies. Look at these things seriously about culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What have they recently innovated? What's new? How did they do that? Did they buy a company or did they do it in-house? And these are the behavioral characteristics of corporations, I think, that make the difference between whether Gen AI is adopted or not.
Yep. Let me shift to on a practical level, the cloud players. So Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, Tencent Cloud, et cetera, et cetera. How is AI changing their business? Are they basically, now they got to be in the kind of insights business. They're not just storing data and providing compute time, but like the insights got to get better. And are they going to find they're going to be winners and losers amongst them based on how they deal with the AI?
And we're talking about the cloud providers here.
Yeah, Azure versus, AWS and the others.
Well, one thing we're seeing is that they are shaping rapidly AI as a service capabilities. So, and you think about LLMs and the compute power they require. No one wants to really pay for that, unless maybe Walmart, the largest company in the world, would, but most companies don't. And so they're going to buy that from a cloud service provider for these LLMs. When we get down to the industrial, language model, then that can change, right? Industrial language models are going to be smaller in nature and very specialized for a company and or an industry, depending on if you're an app provider or a company doing it for yourself. So one, to answer your question, is the AI as a service, LLMs as a service. Two is the fact that only a few companies will have the power and the resources to create these LLMs, as you described. Then they will be furnishing access to those models, clearly, to their customers. So one is, come use our compute power to create your own. Two is, come use ours because we've already done the heavy lifting and we have even industrialized them. And I'm sure Microsoft, I shouldn't say this, but I would expect that Microsoft would be industrializing their LLMs because they're an enterprise company at the end of the day. The third area is allowing for startups to use cloud services in order to generate the next group of applications. And AWS is really good at this. Microsoft has a program for it, and I'm certain Google does. I don't know their program well. But that would be a third leg of this stool. So one is create the LLMs. Two is industrialize them. Three is allow access from startups. And then four, of course, was to provide AI as a service to everyone.
Yeah. So I read something recently that said that 50% of the world's data is just now on the public cloud.
Yes.
You still got a bunch of companies that have their own data centers. Yeah. So with everything you just mentioned, what's going to happen to the companies that don't have access to the large compute capability, AI as a service? Are they going to fall behind? Or no, this is government, it's defense applications, it's whatever, and they're not going to go into the public cloud?
I would expect that those who don't go in the public cloud, and I know companies that were doing this that I would talk with when I was at Microsoft, they are building out their own private capabilities. And they've just decided that that's how they're going to invest. They have more control, and they will maybe trail behind in speed, but they will have access to any technology that they want. So there's that category of company. Yeah. Then there's the fact that most of the world lives in what we think of as emerging markets or smaller GDPs, at least 50% of the world, if not more. And so these companies growing up there will, in fact, be able to use AI as a service. I don't think that Google, Microsoft, or AWS, I believe their business models always allow for the small and medium-sized business, the startup. So those models will be defined. If they're not yet, I would expect they will be shortly.
Makes sense. Let me ask you one last question. We got a bunch of questions from the audience. Your advice to the people in the audience here, students, alumni, et cetera, about their journey, about leadership in this environment, what advice would you give them?
Well, don't be afraid of it, number one. Just be fearless. Two, think about idea generation, right? So you now have all these tools that allow you to create with a very small team of people. When I'll give you an example. When I was starting out in AI and we were using natural language processing, the tools were very nascent, and so we had to build so much of the tooling ourselves in order to parse out what's in unstructured data. Today, all of those things are done for you, right? You have software development tools, you have AI modeling tools, you have AI models that already pre-exist, development platforms that are accessible. So you have a head start. So I think one is, depending on what you decide to do, if you build a business or join a business, become familiar with those tools that are available, make sure that you're conversant on them. Number two would be, and I think the thing that's probably led me throughout my life is that I'm very principled about what I wanted to contribute to the world. I wanted to be a contributor, not an extractor. And I think that, which means I wanted to build businesses, I wanted to create jobs, I wanted to do good. And as a summary, and the idea of that for yourself is define how the value you want to create in your own life, with it personally and in business, the impact that you want to make in the world. And when you do that, that will help guide you, right, to the right roles you want to play. You might say, I want to be a CEO, but to be a CEO, you either start your own company or you work your way through it. And as Satya Nadella would always say, do your very best work in the job you have right now. So right now, if you're a student, do your very best work. When you go get that first job, do your very best work in the very first job, even if you think you're above it. And it's how you take on those roles that will pay off for you. And then finally, be curious and question everything. Do it thoughtfully in a pleasant way, but question everything because, frankly, there's a lot of work to be done to improve the corporations that you might be joining. A lot of work needs to be done there.
Good. Let me see if I can ask you two quick final questions from the audience here. What specific tool can we use as a company to train our enterprise data while protecting confidentiality? We have this issue at UCLA, by the way, about using ChatGPT, and all of a sudden the research becomes public domain, et cetera.
Right.
Your thoughts on this?
Well, ChatGPT Enterprise, I believe, is designed to do exactly that, to give you the power to control it within an enterprise. Also, there are, I'm not really, I mean, I think this is an issue for Microsoft, but I think it left my brain, I'm sorry. There is a complement to ChatGPT that's doing the same thing. So look for the enterprise versions of technology. You should be able to find them. There's data governance systems. Microsoft has Purview. There are many private, or what I would call individual software providers of governance, data governance, which will help. And one of the things I would say about implementing this inside a corporation, we have to get governance right. The policies, principles for data security, data privacy have to be obviously implemented. And then, what data sources we allow into these language models that we're creating have to be scrutinized and verified. So the data sources themselves.
Excellent, excellent. Good, so let me do this. I want to summarize what I took away and see if you've got any upgrades to it or any parting comments. So first message I took away is when you start talking about all the applications, there's a bunch of mass use cases in the enterprise. So talking about virtual assistants, which can affect call center operations, marketing, sales, customer service of all types, that is going to be a fundamental application. You also talked about actually industry sector specific things. You talked about healthcare, you talked about space, where the ability to predict is going to be enhanced notably. You said notwithstanding all of these great things, all of us as leaders have to trust but verify. We're still at a stage with the kind of evolution of the technology that we may be getting feedback or drafts or content, whatever, that is a complete hallucination. And it's probably going to be more sophisticated hallucination. It's going to be harder to detect unless we're really paying attention to everything. Fourth point that I thought you got is, talking about this divide at an individual level and a company level between people that adopt technology and not, the reconciling items will, number one, be competition, and be wary of kind of hanging back on this stuff because somebody else is going to advance. Yep. You also said culture and the CEO, that if you are going to go on a digital transformation, you better kind of have somebody that believes in the use case. And that flows all the way down to the individual. And so then you gave into some individual advice here about don't be afraid of the technology and have your own kind of business plan about what you personally want to do? What is your value proposition with AI? That's what I took away. Upgrades on that or parting comments?
Well, I think the point of purpose, have your purpose, right? And how AI fits into fulfilling your purpose is really the final answer here. But it is part of our lives, and it is going to be natural. And one of the things I truly love is that for the very first time, AI is working like humans do. We are in control, meaning that in the past, we've always had to learn what products did, what AI did. Now, in fact, technology works the way we do instead of the other way around. I think it's a massively important promotion.
Excellent. Gail, let me just say a huge thank you. In such a short period of time, a lot of insights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So a few parting comments. First of all, obviously, to think about your own takeaways. I continue to be amazed at the number of use cases here. And I always kind of look, are people speaking theoretically? Or are they speaking today? I would submit 80% of what we heard was stuff that exists today. And so it's important to kind of say this stuff is real, and we need to figure out how we're going to use it ourselves. A bunch of advice about getting in the ring on this, both companies and individuals. Do not hang back. I find often people that have highly dystopian views of the technology, it's correlated, people haven't used it yet. So make sure you use it, because you can only be effective in creating safeguards if you know how the technology actually works. So listen, a few thank yous and kind of next steps here. I want to thank our speakers. You know, we're only as good as their insights and how they engage with all of us. You're going to get a chance to meet them during the lunch, but a big thank you to all of our speakers. I want to thank our moderators here. The moderators elevate the conversation, and they make sure that there are learnings and not just comedy coming out of a session. So I want to thank all of our moderators. Good job. Our Easton Center staff puts a massive amount of work to make this stuff work, and a lot of the fact that we have interdisciplinary content, that we have a variety of the different schools at UCLA engaged, our alumni engaged, comes from their tenacity on this thing. So it's Heather, it's Darina, it's Connor, and all of their colleagues, so thank you. I want to thank all of the partners that we've had broadly here. So AnderTech, which is the student club here at Anderson, focus on technology. The Accelerator, that's part of the Price Center that does all of the entrepreneurship-related work. The Chancellor's Society, so all of you that are alums and all of you that are students that will be alums, the Chancellor's Society is a chance to give back to the school. And the Chancellor's Society basically acknowledges people that contribute up to $1,000 a year to the school and helps the chancellor identify key initiatives. So you're giving to the Easton Center, I hope it is the Easton Center, or Anderson counts towards you becoming a member of the Chancellor's Society. And I want to just say also that in terms of next steps here, after the lunch, which I'll describe in a second, at 2 o'clock, for those of you that want to think a lot more about entrepreneurship and product management, that's when we're going to have the Ideathon. Starts at 2 o'clock. Marilee's going to be speaking. Ayush is going to be speaking, who's from Microsoft Azure, talking about generative AI. You'll have a series of workshops. It's also a very good lead-in if you want to form a team that's going to submit for the Innovation Challenge. You're going to need to meet people from other schools and think about what you come up with. So similar to what Obi shared with you, great opportunity to do that. Again, that's going to be 2 o'clock back here. During the lunch is going to be held in the B, C, and D atriums. So this time of year, we don't know if it's going to rain or not, so we can't do the North Terrace. B, C, and D atriums. Encourage you to rotate around because the speakers will be in the atriums. You'll have a chance to meet them. There's also a desk outside for the Office of Alumni Affairs. They've got a new digital platform that'll allow you to engage for those of you that are alums or will become alums. Let me just say a big thank you to all of you. It is wonderful to see great attendance, great questions, and to what all the speakers just said about get in the ring and learn this stuff. You're living it out by your engagement here. So good job to you, and thank you very much.